Yeah, Shashi, welcome back. We've had a pretty fun week just at the company level. There's a lot of stuff going on. I'd love for you to just give the general set of updates as to what we're up to.
We had a super productive week. We got our YC app in, which was kind of the least, like this is maybe our third or fourth time doing a YC app. And this is like the least dramatic, like the sort of easiest, least stressful version of getting the YC app in. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's good or bad. I mean, it may be a really horrible sign, but it was kind of, if it was great to get that in, great to feel kind of quick flow and connection with the story we're telling. And what I like is that we're going to do what we're going to do no matter what. And YC can be part of that or not. And either way is cool, but I feel like we have a really good direction. I'm excited to be able to help students. It's especially international students. It connects well with what we are about as people, and so it's exciting news that Nutillo has launched. So that's the big news.
Yeah.
And in the first few days, have over 100 users and lots of engagement. So congrats, well done, Lakshya.
Yeah, you actually haven't seen the update. I think we're at approach. I can literally check the database right now. We're approaching what I believe is like 600 users signed in.
Ooh.
And that's like again, we're really lucky in that like a lot of traction. I think we've always done a pretty okay job like directing people towards things and keeping folks kind of engaged with our content and material. The most difficult challenge now is like make the product that gets a lot of love. But I think for folks who have known us, like we started off making tools that are meant to kind of like fix problems with ChatGPT and like help fight hallucinations, especially in places like that were relatively high stakes, like science, medicine. And that's been ongoing. It's continued to be good. And like, again, like it's the backing off of which we kind of continue to live. But we want to kind of focus more on education. So we're just beginning a lot of this sort of stuff. But we found with a lot of our users, especially international ones, that are going through a lot of hoops to kind of compete at like the typical university setting, to compete in the typical exam, like standardized testing setting. There's just so many problems that are experienced by that particular cohort that a lot of our user love always kind of came from folks who are international first, but living in like a Western setting. And so there's a lot to do there, but we're building all sorts of things. Notillo that just launched that Shashi alluded to is our attempt to kind of make Duolingo for basically any class. So you can kind of treat as a classroom companion that like listens to your lectures, converts your notes, helps you kind of like manage a learning journey. But we're experimenting a lot. Shashi's also building a couple of other things on the exam side that might be kind of interesting.
And just to round out, so everyone understands the success we've had so far with Scholar AI, we've had 600,000 plus users, including users at NVIDIA, at Harvard, Stanford, Amazon, many of the name brand organizations that you've heard of. Scholar AI has users at every one of those organizations. So we've had a lot of success so far in our apps, and the latest one, Notillo, is aimed at students, in particular international students. The goal is we help them crush their classes using the best of AI,
Yeah.
customizing it to the content and customizing it to the student. There's nothing else in the market that does that. I love the anecdote about the students who were trying to cobble together their own solutions for this.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say some more about that anecdote?
Telling us about how a lot of her peers, what they're doing, especially those who aren't English first, is they're stringing together lecture transcription tools. They're stringing together note-taking tools. They're stringing together like ChatGPT to translate. They're putting all these LM tools that like someone like us that's immersed in space are kind of used to using. Like I know I'd use Claude for coding. I'm going to do that for that one specific task. I'm going to use this for one specific task. Whereas that individual is building a tool suite for themselves that is like 8 or 9 different devices or workflows kind of strung together to kind of achieve the final outcome. That just feels like that person's going through enough of a pain point that they're clearly figuring out ways to hack together solutions. We think we can make it a lot smoother effectively. And so that's the kind of like person that we care about. So especially if you are that person, you're listening, get in touch. I know that like both Shashi and I are Indian. I know a lot of the audience of this podcast is Indian. And if you'd like to talk shop in Hindi sometime and figure out like, hey, I'm at an IIT or I'm like going to college at some Western university, but I'm from India and I kind of resonate with what you're kind of talking about, we'd love to talk to you. So you can reach us on whatever channels. We're active on Twitter. We're active on LinkedIn. Come find us and we'd be happy to figure out like, how can we make something that makes your life way, way easier?
It's awesome. And we have more juicy things on the way yet to be announced in development, and excited to
Absolutely.
get those to market and show
Absolutely.
those to you.
Yeah, I think there's just I think the product as it currently stands, there's just so many learnings I've had in just like what the last like 2 years basically of like building AI apps has been that I'm kind of like really happy. Kind of, it's not a fresh slate. Like obviously we're benefiting from like so much leverage and like distribution that we already have. But I have been very much appreciating being able to like reflect on like what was LM development 2 years ago. Scholar has all of those assumptions still baked in. I can't wipe them out because I'll destroy the app if I wipe them out. But now I kind of finally get to like be just like, yes, I fully understand what's the thing to build. I tell Cursor, it goes and does it. I wake up like I take a nap for like 5 seconds. I look and the feature's done. So nice.
All right, so this
Yeah.
is a great segue into our first topic. So let's talk about AI development tools, how they're
Yeah.
working for you in your experience. What models do you like? Have you tried different models? Have you tried different IDEs? What do you like?
Yeah. Yeah. So being very, very specific to what I've been up to. So ChatGPT a while ago launched the Assistance API. This was their attempt at making a very high level API that anyone could build a chatbot off of. And we used that for Scholar AI. We used it for the like core app because it was just like free and easy, like get it done, knock it out, cool. But the challenge in that is that there's been so much interest in these non-OpenAI models, right? People want DeepSeek, people want Claude, people recognize Gemini is really good at long-form context, and we want to be able to mix all this stuff in. And so I've had to like basically home cook. Like I'm a hater, not a hater, but I'm not a fan of what LangChain is. Like I want to learn what LangChain is, and LangChain would solve these problems. But I wanted to just be able to string together and like change my models very freely without dealing with LangChain. And so I'd spent a number of like too many cycles, way too many cycles, on trying to get the LM to correctly code up basically my own assistance API that I can use for anything. And Cursor has been a godsend. I've also found O3 Mini really, really good. I'm very wary of paying per usage on Claude. So I just like use like, or paying per usage on Cursor. So I'm just using Claude 3.5, which is part of like the vanilla subscription. But I found that like I debug a little bit. I ask Cursor, I pass in everything I know is relevant. So again, I know my code base. I dump all the 7 files I know are relevant to the task at hand. I give it the product description. It spins out a first attempt. I've been lucky in that, like, especially for front stuff, it'll knock it out first or second try, which is really great. I have found, and Shashi, I know you've run into this a lot, that when it goes down a wrong path and you're not aware it's going down a wrong path, it can really, really go off like the deep end, which is really annoying.
Hmm. My experience is similar. So I started using Cursor before agentic mode, before there's a YOLO mode where you can just kind of let the agent go crazy and do everything, including use all the tools and terminal and everything.
Yeah.
And that's newer than my first experience with Cursor. So I first used Cursor when it was just the chat version.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would be on a section of code and you would give it that section of code or the entire file, and you'd chat and you'd say, I want to do this with this piece of code. And that felt really kind of choppy and imprecise. And even if it was an 80%, it felt like a lot of work to figure out where the 20% was. And so I felt like there were a lot of lost cycles in that. So I didn't stay with it. In summary, my first contact with Cursor was one where I saw in the ways in which it was useful, but it wasn't saving me enough time in aggregate. And so I stopped using it. And then when I came back to it, I learned how to use the composer mode and composer with the agent mode rather than normal. So there's kind of an agent setting where it will do sequential prompts for you, and then the normal where you kind of give it one prompt at a time. And then you can turn on the YOLO mode in the settings. And so turning on the YOLO mode and using Composer instead of chat was a completely different experience
Yeah.
in using Cursor and much more yielding. So I felt like I was going from 1x. I felt like my first experience was 1x to 1x, and my second experience was like 1x to 5x. And I think, and maybe this is helpful for the audience, is the difference between 5xing yourself and 10xing yourself is really the art of knowing how to prompt and how to use Cursor
Mm-hmm.
and how to use GitHub to break up your project into pieces and how to
Yeah.
use project requirement documents. Can you talk about what's your method for that?
Yeah. So the thing I'll preface with is that like my background's fully technical. Like from the beginning, my job and role in like what our group is has been like very purely coding, right? It's like hands on keyboards, pump work out, get features done, reply to users, keep reacting with features, right? Historically, that used to be like again, look up documentations, go like read like how this API thing is written, copy and paste that in. GitHub Copilot was just emerging at the time that like Scholar AI started. So at best, I was able to be like, hey, take this like JavaScript template I'm giving you and just like modify it for the variables I have. So super light. I'm now kind of the opinion that if you're someone who's interested in building a product, you have like no excuse to not be participating in code. It's hard and like it will take a little bit of like what is the sort of stuff that kind of sets you up to do it correctly. But if you are someone who is business ambitious, like wants to create a thing and put it out into the world, and you trust yourself to have a brand that you can distribute with, you can easily get to coding, like very, very easily. Because I only code insofar as if I recognize cursor has gone off the rails to catch it and send it back. So in my typical like art, I suppose, of like how to use these AI tools, my typical procedure is I know the product I'm working on. So usually you can go to a Cursor, you can go to whatever your hosting platform is, tell them like, give me a base template that does XYZ thing, right? If you need monetization, you need accounts, you can usually rip those offline, like for free, like no problem. Like most of these tools provide that free out of the box. Then I will typically go ahead, start with, I need a product that does this, just skeleton it out. Don't try and like build the whole thing. Just start really high level. Give me the structure of an app that, for example, does food delivery, right? And it'll do a really good job giving you basic components, laying out the page, respecting your structure. You just want to make sure that you're prompting it in a way that it knows what libraries it should be using, what stylization it should be using, because otherwise it might mix stuff up or keep things inconsistent. Once I've done that, most of the like rest of work is just prompt, recognize when I've hit a good checkpoint. So I'll leave breadcrumbs for myself inside of the prompting to know like this is the progress that just happened. And if something goes off path, I can always tell Cursor to go back and check out at that point. So always do something like that. And when there's a really good checkout point, commit that thing to Git. For those who are non-technical, commit to Git just means like store my code's progress up in the cloud effectively. It's that sort of combination that allows me to basically just be a product manager rather than an engineer, because all I'm doing is I'm telling the machine like, here are your product requirements. As in, if you're my engineer, I recognize that you're going off the path. Here's where I want you to go back to and try again with the knowledge that I know of where you went wrong.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'll tell you my method, which is probably less good than yours. So what I start with a Claude UI window, so outside of Cursor.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, first I start with who I am, and I present myself as the engineering manager, and I present that Claude instance as a product manager. So I define its role as product manager and my role as engineering manager. I say, here's the high level project we're trying to achieve. I want you to, the task is to write a product requirement document. And before you start writing, to ask any clarifying questions. So I give it a lot of information up front, including role information, and I ask it to ask me back clarifying questions before it begins drafting. So I do that. It asks a bunch of questions, which are usually really good and annoying. They're good questions that are annoying to have to answer.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I guess I should answer this question. And so you go through that process a couple of times, maybe 2 or 3 rounds of that. And it has all the sort of peripheral fact set, and it will generate the product requirement document. What I do then is I save that PRD file. I save it as a markdown file in my Git folder. So I put that in my Git folder, and the reason I put it there is because in Cursor I want to attach that file, and then what I do is I do a Git checkout. But what I was doing wrong before, when Cursor was going astray before, what I was doing is too big of a project chunk at once. And so I was prompting it to do several different things. I would prompt it to create a database and put in a bunch of schema requirement rules, and then start coding back end, and then start coding front end. And then what would happen is when it would get to, for example, coding the front end, it would say, I can't find this database, so I'm going to create a new one. And I can't input data into the schema. I'm just going to create a new schema. And it would just do all of these things in a circular fashion, so that if it did the latest thing I asked, it would mess up the first thing in the sequence.
Yeah.
So that's where I was making a mistake. So in talking to Lakshya and getting kind of his advice on how to approach the problem, I'm now breaking that up into small pieces and just coding that piece. But the first part of what I said, getting the product requirement document, putting it in GitHub, and then attaching that in Cursor and saying, this is the one piece of the project we're completing, has been really successful. What I do is I keep that Claude instance open, and I say, okay, now for step 1 of this project, give me a very detailed technical requirement. And I take that and I use that in my prompt. So that creates, and I prompt it to give me a checklist. So if stage one of the project is like 16 steps in a checklist, I paste that into Claude, sorry, into Cursor. I paste that into Cursor and I say, let's complete for the first 5 steps of this checklist. Start, So I try to spoon feed it. And all of this is to say what we're circumventing is the overload of context and trying to do too many things at once. And in order to overcome that, what I'm doing is doing a lot of manual context feeding, being very curated about how much context I give in any specific prompt, and keeping that really narrow so that it will just complete the task at hand.
The pretty interesting thing is, I mean, I think Cursor has like very much established a really, really strong foothold just in like what is the Copilot space. Like they fully like kicked Microsoft out of the conversation, which is a crazy thing to have done.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that's very interesting is like even your process is something that like you could add automations to take out work for yourself if you wanted to, right? Like the act of going and talking to Claude and then dumping that into GitHub or whatever, you could absolutely like, and this is like almost like closer to what a Devin might want to do is like you might give yourself a UI one day where you just like say like here are my product requirements. It recognizes how to break up those product requirements. It does interviews with you to understand them, and it goes back and
Yeah.
just manages the PR cycle to ensure that like once it figures out like, oh, I've definitely built up too much context, I gotta stop. When it's able to like recognize that's happened and spin up a new fresh window with more information, like you're chilling. Like you don't need to
Yeah.
engineer anymore. You're just relaxed, just taking your way
Yeah.
through things measly.
But do you wonder? I kind of feel like maybe models are just going to get good enough that
Mm,
this is going to go away. Like this, if like
yeah,
even if I made an interface for myself to do all of
yeah,
these kind of problem
yeah.
chunking things that I'm doing, I
Mhm.
wonder if it all just goes away with GPT-5.
I hope so. I think the thing that I found, and just like in my, so I find that like Cursor, when they added the agentic mode, I still have to be pretty pointed. I think there's two sets of problems in here, right? One is context, and one is how's that context traverse through. Where I think now that they've added this agentic mode, like the way that they choose to select code doesn't feel perfect to me. I think so. In most of the times, when I'm starting a new feature, like I find that I just have higher and faster results if I'm very intentional about what files I tell Cursor to look at, right? So if I know like I'm dealing with a chat feature, I give it all my chat components, I give it my chat backend, I give it the chat definitions, rather than trusting it to do its own thing. Because if it misses a file, all of a
Mm.
sudden now it's going to like duplicate code. And I've even found like I get lazy all the time. Like after a certain point, I like stopped looking at the code. Like this happened like 1 or 2 months ago. I just let Cursor do its thing, and it took me like 2 or 3 like PR features later to realize like wait, like I created like one class definition 3 different ways,
Hmm.
and they're all imported in different places, and that's going to create a bigger problem for you later on if Cursor is just trying to look up like, hey, let me find this class. I see 3 definitions. Which one do I use? I don't know. I'm going to wipe the other 2 and break a feature. So it's interesting. I think
Yeah.
I do think it'll go away. I haven't tried putting O3 Mini inside of Cursor. Again, I'm
Okay.
not paying that way. But one thing I do that I told Joshi about is sometimes Cursor with Claude 3.5, I just get stuck on a problem and can't like take an objective like answer to like how to approach something, especially given that it has context built up. So one thing I'll do is I will grab the file I care about. I'll grab the logs or the problems I recognize are present in it. I'll carry all that over. I'll put it into O3 Mini, describe what it's having, and have it come up with like the overall strategy, like what needs to be debugged for this thing to work. And O3 Mini is not as fast as Cursor is on generating code, or like it won't insert into my database super cleanly. But I'll ask O3 to come up with the debug strategy. I'll give that back to Cursor and have it follow that like sequentially until it works.
Mm. Nice.
I found that to be really, really good too.
Nice.
I think it's especially interesting because it's been like a long while since you've coded, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
How are you
Yeah.
finding like your experience of coding back when you were in your 20s to today? Like how much of a leap has it been?
It's just a totally different practice. When I
Yeah.
was coding after undergrad, this is 20 years ago, it was a lot of hand typing code. And that was the art is was knowing at that point how to hand type the code, remembering the right libraries. Yes, there were places you could look up the right libraries, but really it was felt much more manual. And now it
Yeah.
feels much more like putting modules of things together, like connecting modules of things is what the practice of it feels like. And obviously with the advent of AI and an IDE like Cursor, or other people prefer Windsurf, those kinds of IDEs change the entire game of coding. It still helps a lot to know. I still don't think we're in the place where a Devon style approach of like a non-engineer is able to successfully use these things. I think it really still helps to know what is a database and what is a schema, what does JavaScript do versus what does Python do for you. Like just kind of knowing like the pieces of the puzzle still helps a lot in my experience. And I still have that from my early days of coding, but the day-to-day practice of coding is a very different practice.
Have you played at all with Vercel or like Vercel v0 or Replit?
I've not used Replit. I've used V0 for front end
Mhm.
development, and I really like it. I think it's really useful. And so this is a great place to segue. So I want
Out a little, out a little.